On the rugged coast of Maine, where jagged cliffs met the roaring Atlantic, there stood an old lighthouse, battered by storms and solitude. It had stood for over a century, its light sweeping across the waters, guiding ships safely to harbor. And for the last 20 years, it had been home to a man named Elias, a retired Navy officer turned lighthouse keeper, who preferred the company of gulls and crashing waves to bustling towns or crowded streets. Elias was a solitary man. After the loss of his wife to illness and the departure of his grown children to distant cities, he retreated to the lighthouse to live out his days in quiet service. Each day, he would rise with the sun, polish the great lamp, check the weather instruments, and jot notes in his logbook. The sea was his clock, his calendar, and his companion. One autumn morning, as the sky burned pink over the horizon and the tide pulled hard against the rocks, Elias noticed something unusual washed up on the shore, a bundle of seaweed, driftwood, and tangled rope. As he looked closer, he saw movement. A dog, barely more than a pup, soaked and shivering, lay half buried in the kelp. Her fur was matted, her eyes wide with exhaustion. Elias wasn't one for sentimentality, but he couldn't leave her. He gently scooped the dog into his arms and carried her back to the lighthouse. He dried her with old naval towels, fed her bits of salted cod, and laid her beside the stove to warm. She didn't resist. That night, as wind howled through the shutters, the dog slept soundly for the first time in days. Elias named her Luna. In the days that followed, Luna regained her strength. She was a wiry little thing, with one ear that stood up and the other that flopped to the side. She followed Elias wherever he went, up the winding stairs of the tower, across the cliffs to check the weather beacon, even into town on the rare occasion he ventured in for supplies. Though Elias never said it aloud, Luna changed something in him. The silence of the lighthouse was no longer so heavy. He found himself talking to her, pointing out passing ships, and even humming as he cooked. Luna listened without judgment, her tail thumping with quiet affection. As the seasons turned, their bond grew stronger. Luna learned the rhythms of the lighthouse, the sound of the bell in fog, the turning of the lamp, the rumble of distant storms. She would bark at the gulls and chase crabs on the beach, but never wandered too far from Elias's side. Then, one bitter winter night, a storm unlike any Elias had seen swept up the coast. The sea pounded the cliffs, and sleet whipped against the windows. The lighthouse lamp, battered by wind, flickered uncertainly. As Elias worked to stabilize the system, a distress call came through the radio. A fishing boat was floundering in the bay, disoriented and unable to find the harbor. Elias leapt into action, but the fog was thick, the beacon dim, and the power unstable. Suddenly, Luna began barking wildly, rushing from room to room. She scratched at the door and whined until Elias opened it. Then she bolted into the storm. Elias, heart hammering, followed her. Down the rocky path, through icy wind, Luna led him to an old signal flare box he'd forgotten. He hadn't used it in years. With shaking hands, he lit the flare and fired it into the night sky. A burst of red illuminated the cliffs, casting shadows across the sea. Minutes later, the radio crackled. The fishing boat had spotted the flare. They were safe. The crew would later say the red burst had been the only thing that saved them from the rocks. Back inside, Elias collapsed beside Luna, overwhelmed with gratitude. He held her close, whispering thanks into her fur. From that night on, Luna was more than a companion. She was his guardian, his lighthouse within. Years passed.
Elias aged, his steps grew slower, but Luna remained faithfully at his side. Locals began calling the lighthouse the Dog's Watch, and visitors often left dog treats at the gate. When Elias finally passed, peacefully in his sleep, Luna sat beside his bed, still and loyal. She was taken in by a family from the village, and every evening she'd walk to the lighthouse steps and sit, watching the sea as if waiting for the old man to return. And in time, a bronze plaque was placed at the lighthouse door. It read, "In memory of Elias and Luna, keepers of the light, guardians of the storm,